So I'm going to show you this gun. This is a water gun. This is my kid's little water gun. And in all guns, there's a trigger mechanism right here. When you press on it, then there's something that comes out. In this case, there'll be water coming out if I press on the trigger. So as you can see, the trigger is a very small mechanism, right, compared to what comes out of the gun, the explosion, the ammunition that comes out of the gun when there's a trigger. So understand that the trigger is just a small thing that happens. So for us, it may not feel small in the moment. It's usually our children's behaviors, or when we've told them to not do something, they keep doing it, or they're fighting, or they are simply not listening to you or doing what you want them to do in the moment. All of that triggers that happens. It comes in your environment, and suddenly, boom, you have a reaction, a strong reaction, which is emotions that are coming up for you. And usually those reactions are not something that you're choosing in the moment. It's not something that you're thinking you're going to react that way. They just come out of you. So the trigger is a small mechanism, but the weapon itself, which is the gun here, is already loaded. So when you press on that trigger, something comes out of it. So what comes out of it is what we're experiencing in the moment. So if there's a lot of anger will come out. If there's fear will come out. So whatever is already inside of you is going to come out when that trigger is pressed. So there's that famous saying that we say as parents, is that my kids know how to push my buttons. So your button is that trigger. And when they push that button, there's something that come out of you. So that's the loaded weapon, the explosive that's present is what comes out of it. So how about, instead of wanting to learn how to change the behaviors that are triggering us, which, as you know, if you have multiple children and having to change or hoping that your child will change their behaviors. And if you have multiple children, you can X those behaviors by, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many kids you have. It becomes this very challenging and very impossible thing to do, to want their behaviors to change so you do not respond in a certain way. So when you're responding, it's coming from you, right? So when it comes from us, we want to learn more about the ammunition. What comes out of the gun when you press the trigger, what comes out of it. This is what you want to explore and be curious about, instead of being more focused on changing your children's behaviors. Now, about your children's behaviors, if you haven't watched my video from last week, I explained in that video why children behave a certain way, the misbehaviors, the tantrums, the acting out. Why do they do that? They do that for a very good reason. And if you haven't watched the video, go watch that one so you can understand your child better and why they are having these behaviors. And in this video, I'm going to explain what is going on inside of us as parents when they're misbehaving, when they are engaging in those attitudes and behaviors that trigger us. So focusing on what is coming out from within us, that we can control better, that we can do something about. Other people's behaviors, even if it's our children's behaviors, we think we can impose on them and we can ask them to change, which, with time, with a lot of effort, they may change, but it's not going to be all the time. And this is what makes things very frustrating for us. So instead of wanting the behaviors to change, how about we start to change our response to those behaviors? And I think for most of us parents, we know that already. Our gut feelings are already saying that, because when we're triggered and we're responding in this explosive way, we know that there's something needs to change, right? You can feel it inside of you. I know I did. And it's like we're searching. So if you're curious about your triggers right now, there's something within you that's telling you there is a better way of responding to those triggers that you haven't quite learned yet, but it's out there. And that's why perhaps you're watching this video to tune into what is it that I need to focus on that's within my control. And when I do that, then I feel that I'm more empowered in those situations. I don't feel like it's just pulling me down the rabbit hole all the time. So the famous spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle, he says, be at least as interested in your own reactions as the people and situations that are evoking those strong reactions in you. Because when we do that, then we move from being a victim to being empowered. Because if every time when we are triggered, we feel this intense reaction that comes out and we can't control it, right? It just comes out of us. We are essentially saying that, whenever you behave this way, whenever you say these things, or whenever you act this way, I have no control. I respond in this way. And if you could just change your behaviors, then I can respond better. And maybe that happens a few times, but what happens when, our children don't change their behaviors and they act out and we keep responding in the same manner? We respond by yelling, shouting, punishing, and whatnot. Then it's never good for either the parent or the child, because when we respond explosively, our children are receiving a message. And maybe it's not the right message, but they're putting some meaning to it that essentially later on can affect them, and not in a positive way, but in a more negative way. And that's where their beliefs, their thoughts starts to develop, right? By seeing what's happening when they do something, and then a parent react this way, and that reaction is making them believe something about themselves. So when we say you need to change so I can feel better, and again, like this can apply not only to your children, but to other people, then essentially you're saying, I'm a victim of how you behave. Okay, let that sink in. I'm a victim of how you behave. When you behave in a way that allows me to stay calm, then I feel good. But when you behave in a way that pushes my buttons, that trigger me, then I lose control over how I feel. I feel these emotions just come all over me and take over. And in that moment, I feel very powerless. And when we move into that kind of situation, we're essentially a victim. We don't feel like we can do anything in that moment, right? So that's why it's important to focus on not just the behavior, but focusing on the trigger. What is triggering us? What's bringing up these emotions in us? And when we can be curious and we can explore that, which requires we do quite a bit of inner work, but it's doable and it doesn't have to take a long time. I can guarantee you that, because I was in that situation, being triggered all the time, and I knew something had to change, and I made a decision to work on myself, and with the help of others, I was able to transform from being triggered all the time and losing control to now my child can do the same behavior most of the time, and I can control how I'm responding. I'm becoming more response able to those kind of situations, rather than feeling I'm just being taken away in that rabbit hole with my child. Okay, so move from victimhood to being empowered, because, and let me tell you something that may be a trigger for you right now, is that when we are upset about something, the reality is we're never upset about what is going on right now. Even if you think so, even if your mind is telling you it's because your child is answering back to you, that's why you're angry. It's never about what's going on in the present. There's something else deeper. There's an open wound that is being touched upon that's usually making us upset. So I'm going to give you an analogy for trigger now. Say I got a cut on my hand, and the cut is opened and it hasn't healed, and somebody walk past me and brush up on the cut and touches that cut. How am I going to respond, right? I'm going to scream because it hurts so much. Now, if I say to you that cut is completely healed, and somebody else walks by me and brushes upon it, would I react the same way? Would I have the same reaction? And you probably tell me, no, you're not going to have the same reaction because it's healed. You're not going to feel any pain. And that's the truth. So a trigger is the same thing. When we are being triggered, suddenly we are not in this very present moment. We are being taken back to a time where we got hurt. Emotionally, it can be physically as well, and both. But that wound, and this is where the physical wound maybe has healed, but the emotional wound has not healed. That wound is still open. So essentially, when a trigger happens, we're no longer present. We're being taken back to a memory of the past of when a wound happened. And when we remember that, our whole system becomes flooded with the same emotion that we experienced back then when that wound initially occurred, when it happened. And we're remembering that all over again. So say, for instance, I always give that example of my own example. I used to be very triggered when I would walk into a room, my kids' room, and see a big mess. That would infuriate me. I would totally get angry about it. And then I would react by yelling at my kids so that they would tidy up their room, and then I would feel better, right? So what is really happening? You may think, yeah, because they're not cleaning their room, that's why you're angry. But that's not it. When I walk into this room and I see the mess, boom, it brought me back to when I myself was a child and when I got yelled at and punished for making a mess. And when I was yelled at and punished for having my toys or my clothes everywhere, I had no say. I could not tell my parents what I wanted to say. I could not explain. So I had to keep that anger inside of me, because a lot of times, just like any children, I was being creative. I had things all over the place because it was enjoyable to me. And the moment that a parent would walk in and get really upset at me, then everything was taken away, including the enjoyment I was having. And I couldn't say anything, because if I did, I would be punished more. I think you can relate to that, right? And so I kept that in. So fast forward, becoming a parent, when I saw mess, boom, it brought me back to when I used to experience that. And because it wasn't resolved, because I kept everything in, now the anger was coming up, right? And so I had to dig in and find that about myself. And everybody has kind of different things going on because you have different experiences. And when I understood that, and now I walk into the room, which, a lot of times is still messy. But now I prepare myself, and I know I see the mess. I'm like, okay, it's not because you can't say what you want to say now. So you can still talk to your children, and I can still tell them, I don't like this, but I communicate with them. I don't have to blurt it out, because that anger is not for the present, about the present. That anger that I used to experience was the anger because I could not say anything, but now I can say something, and I don't have to yell and scream. I can say it in a safer way for my kids, so they understand the urgency. If there is an urgency, we can come to a compromise, because often my little one would say, I'm going to clean it up, Mom. Right now, I just want to do this. And I can say, okay, yes, you can do this, but make sure that when you're done, you clean your room after. And so we can start to negotiate. We can understand our children. We can create that safe environment when we come from a place of calmness and not from that trigger moment. Because when the trigger happens and we have that flood of emotion, there's nothing that's good that's going to come out of it. And so it's important not to react and respond, which we usually do, but that's where we intensify the suffering and the pain happening in the moment for both of us as parents and our kids. So knowing that what is happening in the present moment is not what's bringing up those intense emotions. Those intense emotions, remember, the emotions, the ammunition, the explosive was already in you. And that's what's coming up when there is a trigger. The trigger is bringing up a memory. And that's the memory that's coming up, that's bringing up the emotions. And yes, maybe our kids did something to trigger us, but they're not the root cause of what's arising within us. So by, responding to them and fighting with them, that's not going to resolve it, because in that moment also they're not going to feel safe with us. And when they're not feeling safe with us, they may engage into their behaviors even more and have more resistance towards us. So we're no longer present. We're being reminded of a past open wound. That's what's happening when we're triggered. And the same emotions that we've experienced come up. And next week, I'm going to talk about emotions in more detail. So this is what we call an implicit memory, and implicit memory usually brings up a lot of emotions, and we may not always remember what happened, but the emotions that come up are very, very intense. So why do we get triggered? Well, first of all, we have expectations, right? As parents, we all have expectations because we all have beliefs. It's set beliefs sometimes of how children should act or react or should not react, for that matter. What are the things that they need to do and not do? So we have set of expectations, and the set of expectations and beliefs are running in the background, and we're not even aware of it, but they are happening. And when our expectations are not met, we have unmet needs. So if you remember again, it's in the last training about children's behaviors, children misbehave often and most of the time because their needs are not met. And when their needs are not met, that's a wound in itself. And a lot of us parents are walking around with unmet needs that were not met when we were little. And so when our expectations are not being met, those unmet needs arise within us, right? So we see how our kids respond when their needs are not being met. They misbehave. Well, when our needs are not being met, we're also behaving in a way that's explosive at times, because we're like, no, I want this to make me feel this way. And when I feel this way, then I feel seen, heard, understood, accepted. But when I don't feel this way, then I feel unseen, unheard, misunderstood, and so on. So if you can see that, what we're seeing our children in their behaviors and what we experience and how we respond when we're triggered all comes down to the same thing for all of us. Am I being heard, seen, accepted, validated, understood? So wanting our children to change their behaviors is not going to help our children, because their behaviors are there for us to know that their needs are not being met. And as parents, we are the one responsible to meet their needs. But for us, when our needs are not being met, we cannot ask our children to meet our needs. We have to meet our own needs. And that's the important thing for you to understand. If you feel unheard, unseen, misunderstood, and you're angry about it, you have to go take care of that. And that's where that, the work comes in for you to spend time with yourself, and you don't have to do it alone, and that's what I help parents with, because I know how challenging if you don't know how to do that work, and trying to do that on your own is, it's kind of impossible at times. So you can get help if you want that help. The signs that you're triggered, that from one moment being really calm to the next being very upset, boom, something happens, somebody says something or does something, and that flips you from being calm to being very agitated. That's a sign right there. And your body also gives you that sign. When there's something, tension in your body, you're feeling really hot, your jaw clenching, and you hear some words in your head, here it goes again. He's always or she's always doing this. Those are the signs that you're triggered. And in order not to escalate it, you need to find a way to calm yourself down. That's why it's important that we are aware. So in that window, when we're being triggered, right away, noticing the signs that our bodies are giving us and going to take care of ourselves in that moment is key, because otherwise we will respond with that explosive coming out. And when we respond that way, our children will feel that energy. They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to cooperate with us. Instead, they may make the situation even worse by screaming, by, fighting more, whatever it is that the behavior that they are engaged in. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Do not hesitate to communicate with me. You can comment below, or you can do that and reach out to me.